Welcome, everyone. This is Glenda Dawson, and you're watching Glenda's Dragons Den. LD couldn't make it today, but he will be here another week. Tonight, we have an author, a teacher, an activist, um, great spiritualist, and also uh, someone who is about disclosure and for disclosure, I should say, and has written all about that. So let's welcome Gerard Aartsen. Welcome again.
Thank you, Glenda. Thanks for having me back. It's
Uh,
great to be here again.
we love it. We love it. So tell the audience a little bit about yourself and basically how you got here.
Sure, yes. I've I've been interested in the ancient wisdom teachings since I was about 20 years old. Um, when I was backpacking back on my way back from India to Amsterdam, and an American friend who I'd met in Nepal recommended that I borrow a book of his that he bought in New Delhi and read it on my way back. It was called Jnani Yoga, the Yoga of Wisdom. Um, and it really explained to me. It is a book that was originally published in 1909, by the way. It's still in print, even to this day, 46 years later. Um, and this book that was published in 1909, I did some research on it later, and it turned out that the author, Yogi Ramacharaka, um, was in fact the pen name for a collaboration between William Walker Atkinson, a very well-known New Thought writer from the US, and an Indian teacher who had come to American shores in I don't know, believe 1901, and he stayed in the U.S. for several years. Um, and it is really the book Jnana Yoga, the Yoga of Wisdom, in his version, in their version. It's really about the evolution of consciousness, and it explained to me an experience I had had on in the night while I was asleep of December 1st to December 2nd in 1977. Um, and it's, uh, on the one hand, it's an experience. It wasn't a vision, it wasn't a dream, but I woke up the next day with in the utter conviction and knowledge, assurance that everything is one. The separation that we experience between ourselves and the world, between ourselves and other people, between ourselves and other planets, even. And everything else is just an illusion. And it's not something that we can grasp with our everyday brains, but it is a reality. And the reality is too big to be grasped by our brains. Um, so when I read this, but after I'd had that experience, I was I was traveling with two friends from my village, and apparently they told me that I was silent for the whole day. I didn't even say say them good morning on that
Mm.
day. And the next day they asked me, "Are you okay? Because you didn't say anything yesterday. You didn't say anything at all." No, I'm fine. There's nothing wrong with me. But I was still feeling this sensation. It was still reverberating in me, and I was, I was in a state of bliss for at least a couple of weeks, which I couldn't explain,
Mm.
um, and I couldn't put my experience into words. I tried to write about it in a long letter to friends back home, a letter that never arrived. So I lost. I lost. I felt it was a triumph that I managed to put that experience or my interpretation into words, but the letter never arrived. But when I was reading this book on my way back to Amsterdam in March 1978, was really putting into perspective and like an explanation of the experience I'd had. And since that day, I've been um, on the trail of the ancient wisdom teachings, Madame Blavatsky, the works of Madame Blavatsky. And I bought an interesting book called the Consciousness of the Atom by Alice Ann Bailey,
Mhm.
whose work I later came to find was really an elaboration of the books written by Madame Blavatsky. Alice Ann Bailey worked, her books were published between 1919 and 1949. And some were published after her death in 1949. Later on, I actually about 6 months after my return from India, I first heard about Benjamin Graham, who had just started his mission, and he had just been on his first trip abroad from the UK to give a talk about the emergence of the world teacher for the New Age. And from his information, I gathered that his mission was again an expansion on what was started by Madame Blavatsky and Alice Ann Bailey. And I became a volunteer in a network of volunteers supporting Benjamin Graham in his efforts to share his information across the world. Um, and along the way, I'd also read the books by George Adamski. Um, Flying Saucers Have Landed, published in
Mhm.
1953, and Inside the Spaceships, his two main books, although the first book was a collaboration, or not so much a collaboration, but a combination of a book written by the Anglo-Irish author Desmond Leslie, who put a lot of effort into compiling all kinds of accounts, historical accounts of UFO sightings and extraterrestrial contact
Mhm.
throughout history, going all the way back to the Hindu scriptures
Mhm.
up until the present day. That was a major part of Flying Saucers Have Landed, and George Adamski's account of his first contact in the desert that happened in November 1952 was added as part two to that book. And
Mhm.
in Inside the Spaceships, published 2 years later, Adamski describes his his further experiences and his trips on spaceships that he was invited on. And that is really still, to my mind, the one of the most profound and uh, significant accounts of people having been contacted by people from space. And when after, well, I don't remember exactly when I read Adamski's books, but since I had been, researching and studying the ancient wisdom teachings um, that have been released by the Masters of Wisdom in Tibet through Madame Blavatsky, Alice Bailey, Benjamin Graham, some others as well, Murdo MacDonald Bain, and um, Helena Rerik, Russian disciple. And so these are the combined teachings of the Masters of Wisdom. And when I found out that Adamski's first book was titled Wisdom of the Masters of the Far East in
Mhm.
1936, published in 1936, long before he was first contacted by people from space, I immediately saw the connection.
Mhm.
And I managed to get a copy of the book. It was a reprint because the original 1936 editions are quite rare
Right.
and expensive, of course. Um, and there was a beautiful, concise compilation of the ancient wisdom teachings.
Mm.
So that led me to further investigate Ramsky and his role in the contact history of human contacts with extraterrestrials. And yeah, but, my first articles, I wrote my first articles about the Dembski in 2008, 2008, yeah, for Share International magazine,
Mm-hmm.
and that was founded by Benjamin Graham. And when I kept finding more information that I thought was important to share, I decided to write a book, or try to write a book and publish it myself.
Right.
I didn't know if I would manage, because I'd never written a book before. But I managed, and it was duly published. And I'm going to work on an expanded and revised edition this year,
Mm-hmm. Good.
because I found much more information to add. Um, and that's where my involvement in the contact, um, the field of ET contact
Mm-hmm.
started.
Mm. So, just for those that don't really know anything about it, or they may not even realize that they know anything about it, give us a little background or a little bit about the ageless wisdom. Um, you know, I know about the golden rule and all that, but tell our audience, explain it a little bit.
Sure, the ageless wisdom teaching is really the combined wisdom of the masters of wisdom,
Hmm.
um, presented in terms, in a form, for today's audience, for today's humanity. It has been around ever since humanity appeared on this
Right.
planet, because that's also when the first the first masters were here, even though they had not come out of Earth humanity. They were here, sent from other planets to oversee humanity's evolution. Um, but gradually, through the evolution of consciousness,
Hmm.
um, humanity, or the more advanced members of humanity, um, entered the ranks of the spiritual hierarchy and
Right.
became masters of wisdom. Um, and they took over the positions in the hierarchy. So nowadays we have a spiritual hierarchy of masters who have come out of Earth humanity, who've been ordinary humans, um, and through the evolution of consciousness along the path of return, um, have gone beyond the strictly human state.
Hmm.
And in order to help and inspire the rest of humanity, because we're not all traveling the path of return at the same pace.
Right.
We haven't all started at the same time. It's a process that takes many, many, many incarnations.
Hmm.
Um, uh, the masters are always there to inspire us from behind the scenes. All from They used to be out in the open, and even at one not one point, but during one extensive time in human history, during the days of Atlantis, which
Hmm.
lasted for many, many millions of years. They were the rulers of humanity as the
Right.
philosopher kings, and that there are many authors, people nowadays um, who contend that humanity had access to far more advanced technology than we have today.
Hmm.
And I as a based on the literature that I've studied, I know that that is a fact. But that was not technology that was developed by humanity, but rather gifted to humanity by the philosopher kings of the time, the masters of wisdom
Right.
at that time. When the main body of Atlantis was destroyed, the masters gradually retreated into the remote mountain and desert areas of the world,
Hmm.
um, because that is when humanity chose to experiment with the materialist side of creation
Mm-hmm.
and how to say that, deviate from the royal path back to the source.
Right.
And and that touches upon the crises that we see in the world now.
Mm-hmm.
Humanity finds itself um, at the on the battlefield between the forces of materiality and the forces of light,
Exactly. Yes.
and that is because we are, ourselves, our highest selves, are the divine spark, are the
Mm-hmm.
spirit.
Mm-hmm.
But we, on this planet, we have to take incarnation in order to travel the path of return in a physical body. There's
Right.
no other way. When we are out of incarnation, we're not really evolving. Then we are in a state of nirvana, or something like that, paradisial state of being, but not evolving. Um, so, in order to evolve, we need to take incarnation. But spirit and matter, they are not in balance
Mm-hmm.
for the most part. When you've evolved beyond the strictly human state, like the Masters of Wisdom, they are strictly their higher selves, their spiritual beings, and they can take any form that we recognize at will. They don't need
Mm-hmm.
to be born. They can be born if they so choose to,
Right.
but they don't have to be born um, in the usual fashion.
Correct.
Um, for most of humanity, as we can see nowadays, the material aspect, the matter aspect, is still dominant.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the life of Jesus really is an illustration of the battle, well, not really a battle, but the process that we're going through, in that the path of return, the process of the evolution of consciousness, is about releasing ourselves from the bondage of matter.
Yes.
And we see that illustrated in Jesus's resurrection after the
Mm-hmm.
crucifixion. So at the crucifixion, he gives up the material aspect of himself, of his
Mm-hmm.
incarnation, and then I don't know, 40 days later, I believe, um, he he's resurrected, and that is the victory of the spirit over matter.
Right.
And this battle between the forces of materiality on this planet, they have their own role according to the teachings. They have um, their legitimate role to play on this
Right.
planet, because our planet is at this stage in its evolution, and it has this particular purpose in the solar system.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, but the forces of materiality are, they're trying to increase their hold on humanity, so that we don't evolve and are no longer dependent on matter.
Right.
And there's this eternal, so it seems, battle, which we see reflected in the old stories in the Old Testament. For instance,
Mm-hmm.
we see it reflected in the Bhagavad Gita, where
Mm-hmm.
Krishna tells his uh, um, his disciple Arjuna about the battlefield that they're on, Kurukshetra. Um, we see it reflected even in popular superhero stories. Superman versus the bad guys.
Right.
It's good against evil.
Mm-hmm.
We have, at this point in our evolution as humanity, we have a very important role to play.
Yes.
We can see it around us. If we don't adhere to divine laws,
Mm-hmm.
like um, the law of love, which
Mm-hmm.
we see expressed in the Golden Rule: treat
Mm-hmm.
others the way you yourself want to be treated.
Exactly.
We see it even expressed in Article 25 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that guarantees every man, woman, and child on this planet just by by virtue of being born in the human kingdom. Um, uh, Adequate food, shelter, healthcare, and education.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so if we let go of that basic law and don't follow that law, we end up in a in a critical conflict situation that we find ourselves in now.
Mm-hmm.
40, 50 years ago, we were in a different position, and we were really on the verge of taking the right the the straight and narrow path
Right.
to implementing that law, when there were proposals, by former politicians and economists, etc., who had come to a consensus in the Grant Commission report that
Mm-hmm.
was published in 1980, that called for international cooperation to avoid further conflict, to make sure that what was then known as the third world would get its fair share of the world's produce,
Mm-hmm.
and would be lifted up with a massive transfer of money, technology, know-how, etc.,
Right.
um, and more um, um, more just economic agreements, to be lifted up to the same level of living standards as what was then called the first world, the industrialized nations.
Mm-hmm.
But through elections and election results at the time, 1979, 1980, um, humanity was promised. Well, humanity, or some countries, especially the United States and the United Kingdom, were promised individual freedom will solve all our problems. The market is the best form of democracy because people will vote with their wallets or with their feet, and
Mm-hmm.
that will solve any problems that we may have. Of course, what we've seen is that has led to the commercialization of every basic human need that we can think of, with devastating effects on Western society. It's
Mm-hmm.
coming to a culmination. If you had asked me 10 or 15 years ago, how bad do you think the situation is going to get, I would not have thought that we would get to the situation where we are now,
Yes.
with wars and rumors of war,
Mm-hmm.
um, which is a much quoted sentence from the Gospel of Matthew.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I'm not a very biblical person, but I've just started writing a few articles for a Dutch magazine,
Right.
um, from which I quote from this part of the New Testament. But these are the days of where we hear of wars and rumors
Mm-hmm.
of wars, where high officials in the military in Europe and politicians um, are telling us to be prepared for war. I mean, who would have thought that?
Never.
Um, it's and that is where this whole false notion of freedom that was promised to people in the late 1970s,
Mm-hmm.
1980s, in the large segments of the electorate fell for that, um, has led us. It's freedom for people who have enough, for people who have the purchasing power, the economic power, to influence political processes, to influence judicial processes, who can escape or evade um, consequences for their actions and fiscal regulations, etc. And
Mm-hmm.
what we've seen now is a massive transfer of money from the society to a handful of people who are soon going to be called trillionaires.
Mm-hmm.
We have millionaires and billionaires, and millionaires really, if you're a millionaire nowadays, you don't really count. You
Right.
need to be a billionaire to be invited to the party. But soon there will be trillionaires.
Right.
What are we doing to ourselves? How are we allowing this? So many of the basic human rights that humanity has struggled for
Right.
to obtain over 150, almost 200 years,
Mm-hmm.
have been scrapped. There's no job security. There's less and less job security in Western
Mm-hmm.
countries. 0-hour contracts,
Yeah.
no minimum wages, no right to join a union. All these things that help to empower people,
Mm-hmm.
to unite people, and to when you have to worry about where your next meal comes from, when you have to worry about how to pay your hospital bill because you've been diagnosed with cancer or some other illness,
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't give you freedom.
No.
That ties you to, that really binds you to, you know doing
Right.
any job you can
Right.
to pay for your rent or your mortgage or whatever, your hospital bill, your student loan. It's nothing to do with freedom. True freedom only exists when there's also justice.
Mm-hmm.
When freedom depends on other people's poverty, or inability to live a decent human life and to have future prospects for themselves and their children, then how can it be freedom if it depends on something? Freedom is either freedom for everyone or it's not freedom.
That's
So
right.
freedom and justice are two sides of the same coin.
Mm-hmm.
And in the current circumstances in the world, what we see is, um, the the need for never-ending war,
Mm-hmm.
or lining the pockets of the military-industrial complex, the people who run the businesses there, and many other people in high places, or who are the economic powerhouses. But it's not giving humanity, the rest of humanity, any freedom. It's, we live in 2024, we live in a world where I believe over 50 million people live in circumstances of slavery,
Mm-hmm.
either literal slavery or bondage, in terms of earning so little and being so indebted to their employers
Right.
that they have no freedom to choose where to move, or any such thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so the world situation today is forcing humanity really to make a choice. Are we going to continue in the old divisive ways of competition, increasing conflict, creating more chaos, and eventual self-destruction, really annihilation of the human race? Or will we choose the other way of seeking unity,
Mm-hmm.
which doesn't mean we have to all be the same. It's unity is not the same as uniformity,
Right.
but unity in the sense, seeking unity in the sense of cooperating
Mm-hmm.
towards the common goal of surviving on this planet,
Mm-hmm.
restoring this planet to health, um, allowing all of humanity a decent life, with prospects, and with our basic human needs fulfilled for everyone, including education, so we can all have a proper chance at consciously working on the evolution of consciousness, and making taking our own steps towards the source,
Mm-hmm.
which is really what every single religion in the world is about. And those are
Mm-hmm.
just the religious angles, but it's the reality of our lives on this planet. We are involved in an evolution of consciousness, and as long as we deny that or ignore that, and seek material, material progress only,
Mm-hmm.
we will destroy ourselves. We
Yep.
are already we already see the consequences of the, the large-scale destruction that we've brought onto the planet,
Mm-hmm.
by the exploitation, ruthless exploitation of natural resources, the pollution of the air and the seas and the soils and what have you. Um, so, and all in the pursuit of profit.
Right.
It's all in pursuit of profit, and not spiritual profit. So that's the sad part, and we are forced circumstances that we have allowed to come up, um, are forcing us to make that choice. And fortunately, we are not alone.
Mm-hmm.
And that is that's the hopeful part of what I've found through my research and my studies. Um, I already mentioned Benjamin Graham before, and I
Mm-hmm.
mentioned the spiritual hierarchy of masters.
Mm-hmm.
Benjamin Graham's mission was uh, his mission started in 1974. It's a very small scale in the UK with a small group of people, and he died in 2016. With a worldwide network of volunteers, books published in many languages. I think 16 books in all. And his mission was to inform the world that the world teacher returned to the world in 1977. Now, the world teacher is expected really in every world religion.
Mm-hmm.
The Christs are waiting for the return of the Christ. The Jews
Right.
are still waiting for the Messiah. The Buddhists are waiting for the fifth Buddha, Maitreya.
Right.
The Hindus are waiting for the 10th incarnation of their god Vishnu.
Mm-hmm.
And sections of Islam are waiting for the return of the Mahdi, the 12th Mahdi, who's
Right.
also known as the Muntasir. So it's a very universal concept that
Mm-hmm.
there's this world teacher, even though they call him by different names. And they don't all expect them based on their own interpretations at the same time, but always at the time of major upheaval in the world, as
Mm-hmm.
we are experiencing now. And this world teacher is really a function in this spiritual hierarchy of masters. He's the master of all the masters.
Mm-hmm.
Um, his personal name, the Buddhists have it right, is Maitreya, the happy one,
Mm-hmm.
in a very simplistic modern translation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and he's been in the world, according to Benjamin Graham, since 1977. There were several times when he was almost able to present himself to the world, but then there's the forces of materiality that are trying to prevent this
Right.
from happening. So yeah, you know, there would be a crisis
Mm-hmm.
by which um, humanity's attention would not be fully on the emergence of the world teacher if we had gone through with it at that time. So he decided to wait, and in the meantime, we humanity have increased our competition,
Mm-hmm.
and we have failed to heed the advice of politicians, but also the advice of extraterrestrial visitors to
Mm-hmm.
seek international cooperation. Nevertheless, the world teacher is still here. He's not going to go away. Um, I believe, and that's my personal interpretation of the situation. That's not, nothing to do with what Benjamin Graham has said, because he
Right.
passed away in 2016. I believe, when the crisis, now we have a crisis in Ukraine and in the Middle East, when the crisis becomes so acute that it would threaten the survival of the human race, the world teacher will step forward,
Mm-hmm.
even if humanity's full attention isn't exactly there, but he will choose a moment when he can count on the most part, the majority of humanity's attention,
Right.
to present himself to the world and to present humanity with the reality, the spiritual reality
Mm-hmm.
of our beings, um, and inspire enough people to fight for what is right, not to take up arms, but
Mm-hmm.
to fight in terms of voicing our determination to heal the world, to
Mm-hmm.
bring humanity together, to strive for unity, um, and unity in diversity,
Right.
respect differences, and still, refrain from taking up arms if you disagree with someone.
Correct.
Um, the world teacher, when he presents himself, he will also present a number of the masters of wisdom who have also
Mm-hmm.
returned, taken up their places in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And he will confirm, maybe not immediately, but soon after his emergence, the reality of the extraterrestrial visitors
Mm-hmm.
who are here specific in these days, since the 1950s, specifically in support of this event.
Yes.
So, and we've all heard stories about alien abductions and probes and cattle
Mm-hmm.
mutilations and all those things. Those are stories that were planted from the late 1950s onward, and especially the early 1960s,
Mm-hmm.
to confuse and scare the public about the extraterrestrial visitors.
Well.
If you look at the original stories of the
Mm-hmm.
contactees,
Mm-hmm.
not just in the United States, but in Canada, in Europe, in South America, all over the world, they all tell the same story of benevolent
Yep.
visitors who are here to help,
Mm-hmm.
who are here in support of this crucial time in humanity's evolution.
Mm-hmm.
And if you, as I have done in my books, if you put make a comparison
Mm-hmm.
of the statements that were made and the information that these contactees were asked to
Mm-hmm.
share with the world, there's so many similarities and
Mm-hmm.
corroborations. Also corroborations with the ageless wisdom teaching that is the only valid and reliable information that we have about the visitors from space.
Well, I could tell you from my experience, they've always been very healing to me and to those that I have met in the ships. Those other humans that were there also receiving healing. They're trying to help us. As a matter of fact, I just did, which I usually don't do, but I did predictions for this year because I was asked to. And basically, what you're saying, this is a moment where we really needed to start going within, joining ourselves, uniting into the oneness of consciousness instead of separating ourselves or continue that illusion and continue letting the negative get more power, more get more food basically. Okay. And if not, basically, we're going to end up like one of those planets that we're visiting now, like Mars, completely isolated and done, dead. But um, so it's kind of nice to hear it that my predictions were basically in the same line as what it's kind of like a confirmation without needing a confirmation. So, Um,
That's
but yeah,
great.
yeah, I don't usually like to do that, but I did this year, and all I kept saying was like, "Oh dear Lord, it's just bring, let the good masses start to show up."
Yes, and it's important, I think, for everyone who
Hmm.
who realizes that this is what is going on, to make our voices heard.
Hmm.
To show the people around us that they are not alone. People
Right.
who may feel this way but are, reluctant to speak out. Because we need to show, to start with, politicians that we need conflict resolution, not
Hmm.
conflict escalation.
Right.
We need safety from destruction,
Hmm.
um, and the conflict the conflicts that are going on now could have been resolved many, many years ago if we had decided not to feed the military-industrial complex, but to sit around the table and respect, differing views and seek mutual solutions.
Right.
Even if it takes years, it doesn't matter because it will help us see other points of view eventually,
Correct.
and it will help the opposite party as well. And that's the only way we can go forward on this planet, unless we are really hell bent on destroying ourselves.
And then there goes the whole planet, which is built for an opportunity for the soul to really go through this, to evolve and grow.
And according to the teachings, our planet is really, every planet has its own purpose, has its own path of return,
Right.
and its own role in whatever solar system it forms part of. But our planet is unique in that it allows the divine spark, which every human soul is a spark of the divine, to take incarnation at this level of physicality, and that's unique, and that also causes apparently the pain, the suffering that we as a whole, humanity as a whole, have been going through in the course of our evolution.
Right.
But it will allow us to contribute something again that is unique to this solar system, and we, of course, obviously, we have no idea what that might be.
Right.
And we need not concern ourselves with it. What we need to concern ourselves with is the fact that we are one human family.
Exactly.
And there's no way around that. And you cannot say, well, I don't want to have anything to do with your part of humanity. You can go to the moon or somewhere else or to hell.
Right.
It doesn't work that way.
Right. Exactly. It's I'm one of those that believe all paths lead to the same way. We came from love and we go back to love. And what we do in between is what gets us there, what gets us back to home,
Or what gets us lost.
or gets us lost.
Yeah. But true, yes, yeah. We
So,
came from love, and the only way back to the source is through love.
exactly. So now, tell us about your books.
Yes, I think the last time I was on your show, I had just published George Adamski, or the Adamski book of disclosure of UFO UAP disclosure, the Adamski book of UFO UAP disclosure, in which I correlate recent discoveries or revelations of what are now called UAPs, like the Pentagon videos, the Stanford professors' analysis of UFO-related materials, scientists' confirmations of ET contact, renowned scientists. Most recently, I think it was in 2020 or 2021, when an Israeli professor and former head of Israel's space program confirmed the reality of contact with ET visitors.
Right.
All these things that had already been described and documented by George Adamski before he was ridiculed and denounced and derided, by the vested interests who didn't want the public to be interested in the message that he, among many other contactees, were asked to give to humanity: seek international cooperation to avoid annihilation. And we're back at the same point now, because when George Adamski's mission was going on, that was the 1950s.
Right.
We were in the middle of the Cold War, with the immediate threat of nuclear attacks from the Soviet Union or from the United States. and the space people were there then to warn us. You
Mm-hmm.
know, in 2010, I believe it was, Robert Hastings brought together a large number of military U.S. military personnel who had been based at nuclear bases, or former military personnel who had all had the same experience of UFO sightings
Mm-hmm.
and nuclear devices being turned off or switched
Mm-hmm.
off.
Right.
Um, and George Adamski was already, the first report about George Adamski's contact in the Phoenix Gazette from Arizona was 4 days after his first contact, had as the headline something to the effect of the A-bomb blasts that were taking place as part of the nuclear tests
Mm-hmm.
for improving the atomic weapons was the reason for the many UFO sightings and the visits from space.
Mm-hmm.
So there's another correlation there. And now we find ourselves in the same very dangerous position. And yeah, the the disclosure efforts that seem to be well on track since the Pentagon confirmations of the authenticity of the onboard cameras that
Mm-hmm.
recorded UAPs. That seems to have been derailed again by some laws or things that were passed in Congress or not passed in Congress. But the visitors are here. They are busier than ever, and
Mm-hmm.
they are not. They're also not going away because they're here in support of that momentous event where
Right.
humanity will be reintroduced to the reality of its spiritual nature, which
Mm-hmm.
we have lost sight of. But it's or we seem to have lost sight of that in a large, because so many of us are completely absorbed by the need for making money in order to survive.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the danger of the present situation that we find ourselves in.
Right. Right. Now, do
By
you
the way,
have?
you asked about my books very
Yes.
briefly. That was the book that was published just then. Since then, I haven't really published another book. I did reprint. I published a reprint of a small book of poetry that was compiled by George Adamski in 1937.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Metaphysical poetry.
Okay.
Um, yes, I think 12 poems, and I wrote the introduction to the reprint in which I've um, documented the history of the Royal Order of Tibet, in which he started his first public mission in the 1930s. And it's the first
Okay.
time, a fairly complete history of that part of his life has been documented.
Very good. So people can find that in Amazon.
Yes, yes, it's called Petals of Life.
Right. Okay. So
Yeah.
I'll put up your author's
I,
page there, and then they can look it up. And then you also have other publications that.
yes, and they're all listed on that author page on Amazon and also on my website, which I
Right.
have here. Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
So all right. Perfect. Do you have any plans, immediate plans for other books or?
Not immediately. I mentioned that I'm going to work on a revised and expanded edition of my first book, George
Right.
Adamski, A Herald for the Space Brothers. The first edition is out of print now. Excuse me. But for the moment, I'm working on a series of articles for a Dutch magazine,
Mhm.
and I'll probably start working on the new edition of my Adamski book in the second half of this year.
Okay. Looking forward
I'll
to
get
it.
in touch when
Yes,
it's going to
please.
be out. Sure,
Please.
yes, I'll
Now,
send you a copy.
we're almost coming to the end of the show. Is there anything else that you want to share with our audience?
Well, yeah, I think it's important, because we discussed the very difficult situation that we
Mm-hmm.
find ourselves in today in the world, and it's there are days even with the background, my background as a student of the Asia's wisdom teaching, and knowing knowing that's a big word, I think, but having an inkling of the things that are going on behind the scenes,
Right.
with the help that is available to us, even though it's not visible to any of us at the moment. But I think it's so important to realize that it's bigger than the people who are hell bent on war and making profits of wars.
Mm-hmm.
And there's forces of materiality and forces of light. The forces of light are on our side,
Mm-hmm.
and we need to be on the side of the forces of light, and make that clear and speak out in what we believe will help us survive and flourish into the future, into a brilliant future that is ours if we
Mm-hmm.
only make that crucial choice
Right.
for international cooperation versus further competition and conflict.
Mm-hmm. Well, perfect. Perfectly said. Just wanted to say thank you, Gerald. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and
Pleasure is mine. Thank you.
all your wisdom. And I just want to say thank you to our audience. And please hold for a second, Gerald. And as always, I send you blessings and I send you love. Bye.